AMD's making some big moves today with a driver update now claiming an up to 97% frame rate boost. We need to talk about that claim to make sure everybody understands what that actually means. That doesn't mean I don't think this is exciting, but we need to be really careful about that number. AMD is also launching a new GPU today, the RX 7600 XT, which is bringing 16 gigabytes of VRAM to the $329 price point. And I'm definitely going to be talking about that, but Intel shouldn't be left out with a driver update claiming an average of 30% boost for many DX11 games. So Intel continuing to make big strides with their graphics drivers as we head into their next generation of GPUs. We have Nvidia announcing some big new features, including a type of auto HDR for streaming video, as well as moving into RTX Remix actually going as an open beta, which could be really, anyway, there's a whole bunch to talk about besides all of that. But let's go ahead and start with fluid motion frames. I've actually had a lot of comments mentioning on my recent benchmarking that I've been doing, asking why am I not including AMD fluid motion frames on the AMD GPUs when I'm showing frame generation? And I think that's a good question, and that actually, I think when we have our talk right now about fluid motion frames, let's talk about its pros and cons, as well as why I didn't include it in previous benchmarking videos, and my thoughts on including it in future GPU reviews, like maybe for the 4080 Super when I look at it against the 7900 XTX, that type of thing. So fluid motion frames, for those of you unaware, is a frame generation technology that runs at the driver level, which means that it's only going to be available for AMD's GPUs that they enable it through their driver software on, which currently is now the 6000 and 7000 series GPUs. And they can enable it on pretty much every DX11 and DX12 game. And it is frame generation. So it does boost the number of frames being displayed on your screen, but it does not improve the responsiveness of the game, which, similar to other frame generation technologies, it is interpolation. You have to get the game actually has to render the next frame, delay showing it to you, and then interpolate 2 frames to insert a frame in between. So there is a minor latency penalty to it, similar to other frame generation technologies. Where this is different is gives it both a huge advantage and a huge disadvantage. The huge advantage is that it doesn't need game integration, so you can just apply it to basically any modern game. The huge disadvantage is that it's not integrated directly into those games, which means that it has less access to game data. It doesn't have things like motion vectors, and it also is unable to tell what is a HUD element or a targeting reticle, things like that, text. And it can't tell what those are, and it can't separate them out from the frame generation layer, which is what often happens with implementations of FSR3 and DLSS3 frame generation. To be clear, AFMF is not FSR3. FSR3 requires a direct integration into games, and I see so many people still misunderstanding that. These are not the same thing. So, the actual quality of these generated frames is noticeably lower than the quality of FSR3 generated frames and DLSS3 generated frames. For me, in my testing, now I tested this when it first came out as a preview driver. Some of you are like, hasn't this been out forever? This has been available in a preview driver for several months now, but it is only just now coming to AMD's stable driver branch. So previously, you had to intentionally know about and seek out the special preview driver and install that if you wanted to access this feature. Now, a lot of people did, but certainly most people probably just weren't, right? A lot of people probably weren't even aware of it if you're not constantly watching channels like mine, that kind of thing. So to answer the quick question of why did I not use that in any recent benchmarking, I use the latest fully released drivers whenever I do my testing, and so it was just simply not available. Because I don't use preview drivers, I use the latest stable driver branch. So as we move into like the 4080 Super Review, I'd like to update my 7900 XT benchmarks onto the latest driver, which would then make this available, for example. But let's actually bring up one of the other quirks with this technology you should be aware of, which also applies to how it can be very difficult to include in any sort of benchmark or review. The fluid motion frames that are generated at the driver level don't report themselves to most frame rate counting software overlays. The only one I've seen that actually reports them is AMD's own driver level software overlay, which is a great overlay, by the way. I really like it. And it also includes some cool updates, including it does tell you the amount of frame generation lag happening. In other words, how many milliseconds of latency is being added due to the frame generation. It can also track the micro stutter rate and interesting things like that. So it's a really cool overlay, but it doesn't report to the normal overlay that I use when I'm running my benchmarks and things like that. Now, including any sort of frame generation as a benchmark number is already kind of sketchy, but I do think including a GPU feature in a GPU review should be discussed, right? So there's, a GPU review should include benchmarks, but it should also include a review of available features and differences between which GPUs you're considering buying, right? So I do plan on including more of a discussion of AFMF now that it has officially released, and I likely will include some, benchmark runs where I show the results, probably just screen capturing AMD's software overlay, showing the frame rate numbers it's reporting. But I will definitely need to talk about those results because, again, the quality of the generated frames are certainly not comparable to what you would get from FSR3 or DLSS3. Again, one of the biggest issues is HUD elements not being available. With HUD elements not being separated out, it's not game aware of what is or is not in some sort of HUD element layer. On fast motion especially, oftentimes targeting reticles and text and things like that, depending on the game that you're playing, can get garbled. And for me personally, that is very distracting because it interpolates them and it doesn't look great. Not that it happens all the time, but it definitely can happen a lot more with this than with other technologies. Also, because it has less data to work with, I believe they'll state it here, it will often preserve image quality by essentially giving up during fast motion, meaning it will choose to not interpolate a frame during fast motion. Now, why would that happen? Because the larger gap, the faster motion is happening on your screen, the larger difference there is between the two frames the game has actually rendered, causing interpolation to be more difficult. So if you don't have access to more of the game data, you could get a very poor result. So rather than showing the garbled poor result, AFMF will choose just not to display that interpolated frame. That is a pretty major downside given the fact that the times when you would most want a high frame rate are during fast motion on screen to kind of smooth out the fast motion. So that is, again, a pretty major drawback in addition to just, like I said, the HUD elements generally being causing more issues than with other frame generation technologies, and just in general, the generated frames are of a lower quality. I'm not saying an unacceptable quality, but of a lower quality than what you get from the frame generation that is directly integrated into a game. Hopefully that's a decent discussion of this technology. If you want to find it, you download the latest stable release drivers, you enable HyperRX, and then once you've done that, you can then turn on these features individually or on a game-by-game basis. And definitely keep your eye out on that. Now, when we're looking at claims like up to a 97% FPS boost, you might be like, well, frame generation doesn't usually double your frame rate because it takes some processing time and things like that. That's true. They're lumping in quality level upscaling combined with the frame generation when they make this claim. So they're saying here that up to 97% average increase in performance across select titles at 1080p resolution when AMD Fluid Motion Frames is on, so when you're using frame generation and you're upscaling with FSR2 quality mode, And then that comparison is being made versus just running the game without upscaling or frame generation. So the 97% increase that they're claiming there is basically running the game natively at full resolution versus upscaling at the quality setting plus generating driver level frames. So just do be aware of what you're looking at here when you look at marketing claims. Anyway, wow, I talked a lot longer about that than I meant to, but let's go ahead and move on to the next major topic, which is AMD released a GPU today. It's the RX 7600 XT. It has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and it comes in at $329. The main problem is that it comes in at $329. So here's the problem. So if I go to buy a GPU in this price class right now, previously, my recommendation has been the 6700 XT from AMD. So in other words, AMD's biggest problem is AMD. AMD already has, at least in the United States, for a long time now, been offering the previous generation 6700 XT, which has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, not 16, but more than 8, and that's critical. Anyway, 12 gigabytes of VRAM, at not only, well, currently I'm seeing 335 as the lowest price. So the issue here is the supply on these might start to dry up. These have gone on sale as low as $299 several times, and generally had been available for $320 to $330 pretty much constantly for months and months and months and months and months in the United States, which means that I don't see why anybody looking for a $330 AMD graphics card with more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM wouldn't have already bought a 6700 XT. So I don't understand what the purpose of this card is in the market other than maybe replacing the 6700 XT if that becomes no longer available. It does have more VRAM than 12, but at this type of performance class, I would be shocked to see any situations where 12 gigabytes of VRAM isn't enough, other than perhaps if you're using this for some sort of AI model. I know there are certain AI models that want to have 16. Maybe you're using certain like mods, texture pack mods, things like that. So I'm not saying there is no place for the 16 gigabyte VRAM buffer, but it's $329. Now, some of you might be wondering, like, Daniel, where's your benchmark video on this? So I usually, but not always, get sent review samples by AMD and Nvidia. Nvidia, for example, didn't send me a 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte, so I bought one myself to test. AMD, usually when they have reference models available, they send me one. However, this card, it has no AMD reference model. So when I asked AMD about getting a review sample, they said to reach out to any board partners that I have contacts with. I have some contact with PowerColor, but I have no contacts at any other board partners. And by the time I contacted PowerColor, they said they'd already sent out their supply of review samples. So basically, I'm not getting a review sample to have a day one review on this. However, I've already bought one. So these are already on sale today. I bought a MSRP model. Was it like ASRock Challenger or something? I didn't want to buy any of the ones that cost more than $329. So I'm pretty sure it was the ASRock Challenger that was in stock at Newegg for $329. So I bought that. So I will get benchmarks out on this on the channel. And besides, even if I had got one of these, it would have been very difficult to produce a day one review with all the high-end GPUs I've been benchmarking lately. It would be difficult to get all of the relevant comparison points to this one updated in all of my, because I update all of my benchmarks every time I do the videos. So you know, it's not just testing the 7600 XT. It would be testing all of the comparison points again in all of the games, all of the settings, and all the resolutions and all of that. So anyway, I'm hoping within the next week or two to be able to get you guys some content related to the 7600 XT. And it'll be nice to look at the lower price class GPUs in general, even if this one in particular isn't a standout. It'll be a chance to update and refresh my testing of those other cards in the latest games. Also, this is a great time to thank channel members who have clicked the join button to directly support the channel financially to allow me to do things. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think there's a huge amount of interest in this. Maybe I'm wrong. So I doubt the ad revenue on a video about this is probably gonna earn me back the money of purchasing the GPU. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, so huge thank you to channel members who have clicked the join join button to support directly financially. Totally understand. Not everybody's in a financial position to do that, but thank you for those who have. Also, just thank you to, viewers and subscribers and all that. But anyway, so what do I think about this? I have watched a bunch of reviews. I watched Gamers Nexus, Hardware Unboxed, and I read the Tech Power Up review. So I do definitely have some thoughts before I do my actual testing, which is, like I said, the 6700 XT has already been available for a long time at or below this price point, at least in the United States, and it's faster. That's my main thought. So if you were just trying to save, and if you were just trying to go for value, then if you just avoid settings that go over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which granted is annoying to do, then you've been able to get pretty similar performance from cards like, did Hardware Unboxed get it in here? The cards like the 6650 XT, which granted is an 8 gigabyte card. That's coming in here, and they're testing an average of 85 FPS versus 95 on the 7600 XT. Now, why is that relevant? Because the 6650 XT has been available for like 250 and below for quite a while now. So I think I've seen it as low as like 230 and 240 fairly frequently. So with that in mind, if you want similar performance from a value perspective, I think you would have, from AMD, you would have already bought a 6650 XT months ago. And if you wanted better performance and more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM from AMD for the same or less money, you would have already bought a 6700 XT. And if you'd rather consider the Nvidia features, the 4060, granted, it only has 8 gigabytes of VRAM, but it also is coming in at significantly less expensive. When you're talking, $295 to $300 versus $330, that actually is, percentage-wise and in this price class, asking quite a bit more. So I guess my issue is the $329 price point. If this came in at the same price as a 4060, then I think this becomes a little bit more interesting because it is a little bit faster than a 4060. And at this performance tier, I don't think people would be using a lot of ray tracing. So that NVIDIA advantage is a bit less exciting or less meaningful. And then the, what was I saying? And then, DLSS, okay, if you're gonna be I'd rather not upscale at 1080p. If I had to upscale at 1080p, DLSS looks significantly better than FSR. The lower your resolution is, the bigger that advantage. But I'd rather just not upscale it, right? At that performance tier. But again, we're talking like, asking that much more, NVIDIA already has more mind share. I think it's gonna, I don't know. I would love to see this be a more exciting product. I just don't think it's that exciting unless it was priced at least even with the 4060, so you could offer a bit more performance and double the VRAM. But if you're offering very similar performance, a bit more, but for more money, and the feature set disadvantage, I just don't see it. Gamers Nexus, if you look at the 7600 XT. Let's see, versus its own previous generation 7600, you can see that it's not that much faster than the 7600 either. Now, granted, the 7600 is an 8 gigabyte card, so if you use settings like ray tracing that go over 8 gigabytes of VRAM, then it's a big performance bump. But when you're not going over that, it's just an overclocked 7600. It doesn't have any additional, cores or anything like that, so it's just a few percent faster. So, yeah, I don't know, guys. I don't know. It's a tough sell against both AMD's own products, and I think it would only match well against the 4060 if it came in at around the same price. So anyway, that's my overall thoughts on that, but I will get one on, like I said, I've already ordered it. So once it comes in and I have the chance, I will benchmark it. I will produce some comparisons. And hopefully by that point, maybe we'll have seen price adjust. One nice thing is AMD does seem a lot more willing to adjust pricing to market demand than Nvidia does. Nvidia just releases a whole new GPU that's gonna, to officially adjust pricing apparently. Anyway, speaking of Nvidia, how about we move on to some Nvidia discussion? One thing is the 4070 Ti Super. I probably just flashbanged you with the Newegg screen here. The 4070 Ti Super has now launched today, and it does have some models available at MSRP. I'm seeing 2 models available. The MSI Ventus, by the way, so some people wondered why some of my testing showed a bit more of a performance uplift between my 4070 Ti Super and the 4070 non-Super Ti than some other review outlets. Some other review outlets were using the MSI Ventus model, which apparently has some VBIOS issues causing it to perform up to 5% slower than it should. Which would mean like where some outlets were maybe seeing like a 6% uplift and I was seeing more like a 10% uplift. I was using the Asus TUF model, which didn't have that VBIOS issue, and plus just the set of games that you test. I lean into testing the newest games where the memory bandwidth increase and VRAM capacity right on that 12 gigabyte borderline are more likely to show the advantages of a card with more memory bandwidth and VRAM. So anyway, I do just want to mention that MSI has apparently released a fixed VBIOS, so if you do buy this model, you'll want to make sure you get that. But again, it's looking like the majority of models are over MSRP, which is disappointing. But there are some in stock at MSRP, but if you do get that MSI model, make sure you install the updated VBIOS if you don't want to take an unnecessary few percent performance hit for no reason. Anyway, I don't like to see these already over the $800 price point. I will mention that if you look at the 4070 non-TIs, 4070 Ti not Supers, they're not being discounted a huge amount, but they are being kind of bundled with discounts at Newegg, so that it may be something to look at if you don't really care about moving up to the 16 gigabytes of VRAM. I thought I'd mention that those are getting some discounts and combo deals. Now, whether they're things comboed with things that you actually want affects whether that's of much value to you. Now, Nvidia is also launching RTX Video HDR technology, which apparently turns SDR videos into HDR, and then they release a YouTube video that's SDR to demonstrate it, which, I mean, I understand that most people won't be watching on a quality HDR display, so they're, you know, with a lot of HDR marketing, like things kind of simulate the differences, but display it in as SDR content anyway. But to me, if you're trying to show the HDR, maybe release at least some version of the video that's actually in HDR for people with an HDR screen, who are the people who would actually benefit from HDR, whatever, anyway. So this is an update to their RTX video upscaling, where they've already had the upscaling available if you're in a Chromium-based browser. Now they're doing it where you can do the upscaling plus converting SDR into HDR. I haven't been able to test this myself yet, but it is at least interesting. Personally, I found the performance hit from using the AI video upscaling to be more than I would like, just from like, I don't know, I don't want my GPU working that hard just to play videos, but I have seen some people like it. Anyway, the RTX Remix open beta, I think, is personally more interesting. So for a while now, RTX Remix has been sort of available to certain people, and some people have been taking kind of some of what was available within game releases like Portal RTX and kind of working with those files and kind of dropping them into some older games. But we now have an actual open beta for RTX Remix. Now, reminder of what RTX Remix does. If you have certain games. Now, there is a compatibility list. These have to be older games, and this is kind of cool. On ModDB, there is a database now on which games are playable using RTX Remix, and then which games are partially playable, and then which games are just they load, some are just totally unsupported, but you can kind of filter out the games based on that. Now, there's not a huge number of games that are green check marks right now. I don't know if that will expand over time with more testing or development or anything like that, but it's certainly at least interesting. And we have seen some pretty cool uses of this. Now, this Tomb Raider RTX remix is one that was done actually before the open beta release. So this is an example of what some people were able to do before getting the open beta release. And so the idea here is you can inject things like path tracing into older games. Now, you could also then go through and try to update the models and textures and give them certain properties and things like that. But one of its basic use cases would be injecting the ray traced lighting solutions into these older games, which is kind of cool. And then, so you can look at some comparisons of that. And again, this one was actually developed before we got the open beta version. So I'm interested to see what people do with this. Modding communities tend to impress when given the right tools, so that's pretty cool. Let's move on to some other NVIDIA news. We do have the RTX 4080 Super coming out next week, and we are seeing some leaked benchmarks showing similar performance to a 4080 non-super. However, I don't really need to talk much about that because that should be utterly non-shocking. We already know from the specs that it's just a fully unlocked AD103 die, and the 4080 non-super was already almost the full die. We're talking only like a 5% increase to cores, and we've seen on our other super GPUs where the core increase percentage, the actual game performance increase has been less than the increase to the number of cores. So if you're only getting a 5% increase to cores, it would stand to reason that you have a 5% or even likely less improvement to actual gaming performance from the 4080 Super just based off of the specs that NVIDIA has already released. And also, during a media pre-briefing when I asked, NVIDIA, they literally said expect like a 2 to 3% performance uplift. So that's what NVIDIA just flat out claimed when talking to me in a media pre-briefing. So yeah, the 4080 Super is just a 4080 with like 5% more cores, probably at less than that uplift. The big thing is that it's a $200 price cut off the MSRP. So really, this is just NVIDIA lowering the price of the 4080 by $200, but they don't want to admit they're lowering, they priced it too high, so they're releasing a new GPU with the lower price point. That's what that feels like to me. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, Intel is also in the news, claiming that their new GPU drivers have delivered a 30% average boost for many DX11 games. This is the official list of games where they're claiming performance improvements. Notice most of these are DX11, but there are some DX12 titles here like Tekken 8, Last of Us Part 1, but most of them being DX12 games. They're also talking about some performance uplifts for their Core Ultra with the Arc series integrated GPUs. Now, these performance uplifts range from pretty minor, like 4%, up to pretty impressive, like 268%, or 69%, nice, or 160%, 101%. So there's definitely some big improvements here. Now, I have not had a chance to benchmark the previous driver versus the new driver in these games or anything like that. But if I do, I do plan on, when I test out my 7600 XT, when that comes in, I'll be retesting similarly priced GPUs, which would include some NVIDIA competition, some Intel competition. So I will probably get some fresh Intel Arc benchmarks out here pretty soon as well. I'll finish with this. Palworld continues to set records, selling 7 million units on Steam. And that's just on Steam, and is apparently outselling Pokemon Legends Arceus. But the Pokemon comparison is, people are nervous. Is Nintendo going to come after Palworld? Well, so far the base game has not had any issues with Nintendo coming after them, but there have already been mods introducing Pokemon into the game, and those mods have come under fire from Nintendo. So Nintendo is certainly keeping their eye on the situation and are very aware of the similarities and not letting it go too far through mods, apparently. Last thing I'll leave with is this. PlayStation will be on PC, cloud, and mobile, says Sony's CEO. Also, the Sony CEO giving some thoughts on subscriptions. We've had subscriptions in the news. I mean, there's always Xbox Game Pass and Game Pass for PC, but then there's like the Ubisoft guy was under fire recently for saying people need to get used to not owning their games. So this is some interesting stuff. Let's read the couple of direct quotes here. By the way, all my sources will be in the video description if I haven't already mentioned that. Let's talk about the first quote. So in short, it will be ubiquitous. Wherever there is computing, users will be able to play their favorite games seamlessly. Gamers will be able to find a place to play in different spaces. While PlayStation will remain our core product, we will expand our gaming experiences to PC, and we've already been seeing more and more PlayStation games coming to PC, as well as mobile and cloud. So they're certainly looking into all of those options beyond just their console. But about the cloud model, we had the quote, we do subscription business model. At the same time, people usually play one game at a time. So an all-you-can-eat type of many games may not be so valuable compared with video streaming services. We have kind of balanced a hybrid service on PlayStation Network, a subscription as well as paid content. So what he's saying here is that in contrast to like the guy from Ubisoft, who was like, people just need to get used to this. We've got, Netflix, and Spotify, gaming and, videos and music streaming. That's just the way. So gamers just need to kind of get used to that. The Sony CEO, who probably knows a little bit of something about how people play games, I think has a really good point. People watching videos or listening to music are likely to stream tons of different content within a month, right? Whereas people playing video games are often playing one game until they finish it. And that game often takes a long time to finish, right? So how many different games would you play in a month, right? So with that difference in how you interact with the content, and I'm not saying there aren't a whole bunch of other differences as well, that's definitely just something to consider, and I think that's a very good point. Anyway, hopefully you guys found the news today useful and or interesting. Huge thank you to everybody, viewers, subscribers, channel members, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.